Amid missiles and disinformation in Israel, we are being bombarded on all fronts, including on social media. But there is something even more dangerous, and that is to remain indifferent, to stand by and watch how our enemies try to destroy Israel. How can we fight to defend Israel? Those of you who support Israel, how can you help? Well, here we have someone who will help us answer this question, and that is Avia Levi. Avia, many of you may have already seen her in many social media forums, but I would like to mention a bit about Avia's background so you can see that this has a lot to do with her experience in the field. She was consul of Israel in the Dominican Republic. She was deputy ambassador and was deputy head of mission at the Embassy of Israel. In addition to that, she has a lot of interaction with groups from Latin America because she has been the director of the Hebrew Language Learning Institute, known as Ulpan Ivrit, of the Jewish Agency, one of the most important in the state of Israel. And you can also find Avia on her page, which is Israel Avia. I'll include the link to her YouTube channel in the description, along with her Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter accounts. Avia, welcome to our channel.
Cheers, thank you so much for having me, Jacob.
How would you answer this question? A person who, and I get asked this a lot, is on the other side of the world, literally in Latin America, for example, or in Europe, and sees the amount of conflict happening here, but also on social media, comes across lies and fake posts. What can someone like that do? Just sit back and do nothing? I mean, what other options are there?
First of all, you're absolutely right that we're also being bombarded here by social media. It's a struggle, it's an additional front to what we're already experiencing with all the rockets, the missiles, and having to run for shelter. I live in Israel, in Tel Aviv. I was born and raised in Jerusalem, and both Jerusalem and Tel Aviv are suffering from these missiles and rockets. For those who want to help us, I love the people of Latin America and feel a strong connection. I see this on your channels and in your great work. What we do is share information. And what you can do to help us is really share the information that we publish on social media, because you see firsthand what we're living through here. I mean, we are transmitting the truth to you through here, not from a channel that's far away from Israel or from a media outlet that also has a different narrative. But really, we who live here, you can help us share what we are putting out. By ignoring the news that is false about Israel, or at least setting things straight, telling them it's not true, and always viewing this news critically. Also, what you're already doing, giving strong support, is another thing you can do for me. I receive a lot of support from you, and I always say that you have been my light during this time since October 7th, because this support is incredible and very strong, and it also stands against the hate we receive. I imagine that's also something you receive a lot of too. So for us, your support is a light, and finally, of course, support Israeli businesses. For example, I have digital Hebrew courses. You can support me, you can take these courses, and it's always connected to learning Hebrew. But always, I recommend supporting every Israeli business, because at the end of the day, yes, you also support the Israeli economy, because we then invest here in Israel, and that way it also helps the Israeli economy, which was greatly affected, has been greatly affected by the war.
Of course, the human factor here is very important. I like that you brought it up from that point of view and not so much about facing the enemy head on, quote unquote. The question is whether you think that in any case, if there should be some kind of, let's call it, I don't want to say confrontation, but if the person should also be willing to stand up and represent Israel in one way or another. It's true that our audience isn't made up of Israeli passport holders, but they have this passion and this connection with Israel, which maybe in a way could allow them to represent it. How would you see it, especially since you have already represented Israel on several occasions diplomatically in Latin America? Could someone who isn't Jewish do it in this way?
100%, I think that anyone who loves Israel and knows the history well, which is often our audience who knows the history well, often they know more than the Israelis who live here. But they don't always know all the biblical stories or the whole history itself, because it's not always something very prominent. So the people who do know can present the facts, but as for confronting someone, I don't really believe in that attitude. I'm more maybe diplomatic. It's more about having a dialogue, though sometimes I realize it's impossible to converse with certain people. In this case, it's best to ignore them, because as Agamben says, we also need to take care of our mental health. Also, we need to dedicate time to our mental health, to our well-being, and not always. Sometimes when we face someone who only wants to hurt us and isn't really open to listening and learning, sometimes it's better not to get involved. I mean, it depends. We need to understand who the audience is that's writing these fake news stories. If you see that you can be the light in this case and add the correct information, that's excellent. But if you see that it's already lost, it's a lost cause, many times I recommend ignoring it, just ignoring it.
In fact, in the theory of the rods, this is one of the principles, that the population is divided into 95 and 5%. 5% of people support Israel unconditionally because they know the map, and that is, their position won't change. 5% of people are against Israel, and no matter what you tell them, it's the case you mentioned of, let's see, no matter how many arguments in your case, they will go against Israel. And then there are 90% of people who are curious, they have questions, they know part of the narrative. The 90% of people, they could really have a dialogue, as you said, in a very respectful, diplomatic way, and really make a very, very big difference. There was a question. Do you think there is any extra factor to support Israel besides what you've mentioned? For example, I think obviously not everyone has the ability, or at least not right now, to come, for example, to visit Israel. But are there any other ways? Like, not just that. Because you say, well, to have contact with people who have the experience, who live here, or a person, if they come to Israel, they live the experience. But what other alternative is there? I mean, aren't the resources pretty limited? Because in the end, how many people are there who present this perspective? A handful of people on YouTube, what other alternative do they have?
Look, I also think that when it comes to the media, for example, I know there are many broadcasters or journalists who follow us. So I think it's very important that they also bring the voice of the Israelis. Because I think it's super important for people to hear from the Israelis themselves who serve. I, for example, served in the army. Of course, I'm Israeli, so it's mandatory here for both men and women. And for me, I think it's important that I can explain what my experience in the army was like as a soldier. What are the things they tell us? That already affects a lot of the narrative of how people see us. If they think the Israeli army wants to do X, but I say I was in the army and have relatives fighting in Gaza, they can reveal the truth. So we can also say that what can really help is bringing in the voices of Israelis who live here. And many times, maybe they don't speak the best Spanish or maybe they don't speak the best English, but it's still important that their voice is heard in the army. I think the world press is missing something, and speaking to someone Jewish is different, though of course it's wonderful that there are Jews. People often confuse being Jewish with being Israeli. Some Jews support us while others do not. There were also Jews who unfortunately participated in the protest that took place in the United States at the universities. I don't know what you think about that. I think it's a kind of self-anti-Semitism. I believe, in my opinion, I mean, the act of disconnecting yourself and going out to join pro-Palestinian demonstrations and protests. When there are still Israeli hostages in Gaza anyway, there is a difference between Jews around the world and Israelis who live here. I think it's important to bring this to light and, as you mentioned, also to reach Israel. Many times I get messages, is it dangerous? Is it safe to come to Israel? I think we always try to show the complexity that on one hand, yes, we might have to run on the same day because of a missile launched at us from Yemen because we're Jews. But 10 minutes later, we're going to go out on the street because we're a people with a lot of resilience, a people who want to live, who love life, and that's what we try to do. It's a complexity that's hard for outsiders to understand. I invite you to visit Israel. It's a great way to support us. If you can, please do.
Yes, in fact, what you mentioned is really interesting because I also perceive it as self-hatred. Because Jews, in fact, anyone who has read the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, will see that in every era there were Jews like that. Jews who opposed the very values of their own people. In any case, I want to ask you a question about this. Someone, and this has happened to me often, has told me they start talking about Israel. And this triggers a lot of tension with many people. It triggers, I don't know if fights, but a very bitter atmosphere because it has been heavily stigmatized. Those of us who support Israel, that we are the bad guys, that we drink. We rejoice in negative things. But for the person who tries to defend Israel, the situation becomes very uncomfortable. In many cases, he loses friends. He loses contact even with very close family members. Recently, a mother shared that her daughter, due to what you mentioned about universities, had it drilled into her at university that Israel was the villain. And with totally outrageous narratives that aren't real in any scenario. The daughter and her mother argue about Israel. What should someone do here? Should they really stay quiet or not? Even so, despite the fear one might have of society, should the person, let's say, have courage? And even so, should they show their support for Israel openly? Or maybe keep their, let's say, Zionist pride to themselves? What should they do?
Well, that's a good question. Honestly, on one hand, I would say yes, it's always better to have that courage and face things, and that's something I always do, even though I receive threats and all that. On the other hand, if someone doesn't live here and feels that it will really harm them, I also mentioned mental health again, which is very important to me. I think each person has to ask themselves if they are able to face this hatred, and if it's someone close in the family, if they're willing to lose them. Maybe it's better. Should we do it in a more educational way or a more creative way? So we don't create such a strong confrontation and, like you said, such an ugly environment. In this sense, I also think we have to have a lot of hope because look, nowadays, you surely know what they do. For some of them, they are people, they hated Israel because they grew up in the Middle East, where there is a lot of anti Semitism in many forms against Zionism. There are even children's shows aimed at kids that portray Israel as horrible, that we are horrible, and they grow up with this hatred, but later they change their opinion. I mean, what I want to say is that there is also hope, and maybe we need to find other ways to show who Israel is, sometimes through TV shows. I think that positive shows about Israel or shows that show the complexity, like Israeli series like Fauda, which we all know, I think it's a very good tool to show that there is complexity. That also, the other side, let's say, does many things that sometimes force us to face them. And just like what's happening now, after October 7th, because before October 7th, people from Gaza used to come to work in Israel. So they confronted us. We were forced to react in some way. I think we need to find a way to say things without getting into that confrontation or to think in creative ways.
Yes, I mean, you're not saying the person should stay quiet to avoid attention, but rather find another way. In other words, you encourage people to do it, even though this can cause a lot of discord among their friends or whatever. Honestly, there's always another way to do it. I really like that because not everything is about fighting. I mean, there are many other ways to support Israel in many other educational aspects with different kinds of language. I don't know if you saw the awards thing. No, that a documentary supposedly won from a super anti-Israel movie that only shows part of the data out of context. And to me, it seems like we're losing the cultural fight in favor of Israel. And you say, well, you can watch series like Fauda and things like that, but they're still pretty niche compared to the ocean of anti-Israel documentaries and a bunch of things like a BBC documentary that came out of the BBC, where every documentary is interviewing the son of a Hamas member. What do people expect the son of a Hamas member to say? Those are the documentaries you see on Al Jazeera and elsewhere, and that's what audiences receive. Do you think someone could produce this kind of content without having to be Israeli? I mean, I don't expect people to start filming a series like Fauda, I don't know, in Venezuela or Argentina. But do you think there are other ways to contribute to the cultural battle? Yes, I call it a battle, but not as a fight, more as contributing to showing a beautiful Israel, even if they're not Israelis. I'm saying this for my audience, since some of them may have skills they can use. One is an artist, another is, I don't know, a writer, another is a dentist. If somehow that can be used, because it's that skill, that ability to contribute, is there any way to do that?
Yes, honestly, what you're saying is interesting because lately I've been thinking about it a lot, especially since I did my master's in political communication here in Tel Aviv at Tel Aviv University. And I studied with a girl who is Arab Israeli with an Israeli ID, of course. And now she's a journalist at Al Jazeera. She went to Qatar, I think, or I'm not sure where she is now. At first, she started here in Israel. And you see how she's giving the news in Arabic and she calls the place Palestine and not Israel, even though she has Israeli identification. Even though she studied with me, she keeps spreading the lies about Israel, even though she knows it's not like that because she studied with me. Imagine I'm Jewish, she's an Arab Muslim. We were in the same university class during our master's degree. She was wearing jeans. I mean, she really had all the rights Israel can offer on equal terms, except that she doesn't serve in the army, which gives her about 2 more years, and supposedly we give or contribute to Israeli society, to our country. So seeing this really impacted me a lot because I understand how communication can change the narrative. It has so much influence. Luckily, some content creators reveal the truth from here. The key is to show this long-running conflict isn't simply black and white. It's not as radical as they might try to show us because at the end of the day, there are many other shades. It's not just here or just there. And that's what we have to show. It's not that we have to show someone that Israel isn't the bad one, Israel is the good one. We don't have to ask this question. to raise this doubt, to make people ask, wait, maybe Israel isn't just the bad one. Maybe there are other shades here. Maybe Hamas did this or that. I mean, and today there are so many testimonies, but at the end of the day, we also have to remember that's what I always say. Look, when the Israeli women came back from captivity and started to say that they had experienced assaults, different kinds of assaults, there were people who, and also after October 6th, there were people
Denied that.
who denied it happened. It really reminded me of the Holocaust, since even now some people deny the Holocaust occurred. So honestly, sometimes I think there are people who just don't care. And I imagine you see it too. No matter how many facts and how much evidence you bring and how many testimonies, they won't believe you. It's so strong, it's so painful. We just have to wait. I mean, have a lot of hope, a lot of faith that God will change this mindset at the right time. Let's talk. We're going to celebrate Pesach in a little while. And during Pesach, right? During Pesach, Moshe goes to Pharaoh and says, "Let my people go." We say the same about the kidnapped people. And in the end, God changed after many, many plagues. But in the end, he changed. God changed his mind. He changed his decision. We could say for a moment, maybe that can happen. I don't know. No, it's a very complicated subject.
Yes, in fact, that's exactly how I read it. It connects with what you're saying, that the person really should question themselves a lot. One of the mottos of the Philosophia Judaea channel is don't buy into stories. And I often tell the audience not to just believe me. Check for yourselves, because if you look at the data and you look at the context, it's very likely that the person will side with Israel. And that's why I say question Israel's side as well, because the data will lead you to support human freedom and common sense. That's why it's true. The part about Pharaoh ties in closely. Why? Because the Pharaoh, in that sense, at one point says, well, I'm going to let Israel go so I don't suffer. And what does Hashem do? God hardens his heart. That is, he makes him not think with his emotions, but still think with his head. Did he really let Israel go or not yet? That is, using reason is essential to understanding why it is important to support Israel in this conflict, because reason is what guides us here, not so much emotion. I say this because there are people who support Israel, maybe for religious reasons or out of emotion, but I think reason always leads to supporting Israel. I feel the same about the university. I don't understand it either. I had professors in my chemical engineering degree, Muslim professors, Muhammad Bashuti, my lab partners, Rufaida, an Arab woman, lab partner Ahmed Rabia, also another one. And they tell you that this is a state separate from the part of South Africa. There were no African people in the universities. They couldn't enter. As you said, the person who immerses themselves most in Israeli reality, feeling it, connecting with Israelis, watching their channels, and experiencing it firsthand. The person starts to feel it more and their eyes are open to another world. So the contribution you make seems very sensible to me, so that people can have more interaction with pages like yours, like mine, and there are many more that I would also like to share in the future. And to start wrapping up this broadcast, I would like to know if there is any message you want to close with for the audience, since there are people who truly support us a lot and want to know how to continue. What words would you say to this kind of audience?
Well, first of all, I would say thank you so much, all in Hebrew. Thank you so much for all the support. Thank you so much for all the love. I believe that despite discussing the rational side, ultimately, according to studies, we often make decisions based on our emotions. About 90% more or less of our decisions are based on the emotional side. And I really don't think it's a coincidence that you have this emotion toward Israel, because Israel has truly shown many times that it helps with innovation, with technology, with many things that we contribute. We try to contribute to the world through values that we truly have here as Israelis, which maybe don't always align and there are differences. But at the end of the day, Jewish people really have in their values this willingness to help others, to be a light for others as well. So for me, it's incredible that you are with us. And honestly, I think I've learned to value it more than ever during this past year and a half. And I invite all of you to join our journey here in Israel to see how we are defending ourselves. From 7 fronts, as you said at the beginning, with new things happening every day, every hour, something happens here. And even so, the most important thing is that I think we still have hope and faith. As our national anthem says, Antigona, the hope, the faith of being a free people in our homeland. And that's the most important thing for me. And I want to thank you so much for listening to this conversation, and to many more, I hope, since you're going to invite me again.
Yes, I hope so too. A fun fact for the audience to know, when I started this page a long time ago, we also did a broadcast about Hebrew that was at the very beginning of our page. And the old school followers of our page will know that, but I'll close that fun fact. Thank you. Thanks to the audience who watched us. As you noted, I saw it on one of your broadcasts. Am Israel Hey, very important words. All of this that we are supporting, you are also part of this process that represents, in my opinion, the future of human civilization. That's how I see it, and we send you warm regards. You already know you can find the Israel channel. I'll put it in the description and send greetings to everyone from Israel.